we originally thought, when we looked at it, we never have applied for this before because of the idea of priority development area. But what we did is we looked at it's a subcategory of rural corridor. And Rose Jacob Gibson, who's my colleague on the Board of Supervisors, argued for this for a long time because of the need for something on highway wind. You know, for example, Sabrina's message about, you know, the accidents that have happened. And, you know, I was a sheriff for a long time. I know about the accidents that have happened on highway wind. In fact, there aren't safe crossings. So we thought that, you know, I know there's Measure A that has money, but the fact of the matter is that what competition does is, and even the money that we have is fairly small at any given time. It's not, we're not going to give a couple $1 million. You know, it ends up being divided between 20 different cities, all of whom have their interests as well. So, you know, the projects over here, I think, are pretty extensive, potentially pretty extensive. And so I saw this as, you know, I mean, again, I knew it was going to be controversial because once you say the priority development, people automatically start thinking that you're planning something, some nefarious scheme to have, you know, a daily city-like subdivision. But that's not the case. And what I tried to do is I sent a message to your chair saying that it's specifically for rural corridor. Now, I know that people also think that maybe there are strings attached. We looked at that. And I know that in Sonoma has some issue of a string attached, but as far as we know, and we were looking at this very carefully, we looked at the whole program, and there's no strings attached for San Mateo County. If there were, we would probably be much more conservative and maybe not even apply for it. But we figured that there is significant funding for a potential rural corridor, and so that's one of the reasons that I became interested in it. In fact, we actually applied for it, and the board approved it. I actually was gonna, you had asked me, Bill, to delay it, and I would have delayed it, except that we heard at the time that we had a due date to get the application in. I know Steve can talk more about that, and so we went ahead with it anyway. But knowing that it doesn't, just because we approve or send it on, does not necessarily mean that it gets approved. And in fact, there is skepticism on it, and there are a number of environmental groups, not just from the coast side, but from others in other counties who went to MTC and ABAG and asked for an extended public outreach. So there has been, it's been put off for some period of time, but I still think it's an opportunity for us. I think we do need, you know, that corridor, again, just, you know, I think the Sabrina has highlighted this quite accurately, maybe even, you know, sort of, you know, there are terrible cases, having children myself, and think that some middle school kid is hit on the roadway is appalling to me. In any case, that's one of our reasons that we're interested in it. Now, the other thing I said, and I said to you, is that development on the whole Midcoast is really controlled by two things: the LCP, and as you know, now I'm still sitting with the Coastal Commission, but the LCP actually says that there will be no more than 40 units per year. And that doesn't mean that, you know, one big high-rise is one unit. No, it's 40 individuals. So if you had a house, for example, or a duplex with two, that's 2 units. And now, by the way, I'm not planning on duplexes or high-rises. You know, I know how difficult it is to do any kind of building over here. The fact of the matter is, we only get somewhere in the neighborhood of about 38 at most housing units over on the coast side. There is in the documentation on this priority development area, it does talk about going from, I think, 4,000 to 5,000. But remember, that's if and only if the board approves 40 a year, if and only if you get to the Coastal Commission, and we all know that's pretty difficult. And that's sort of that's a projection. The other thing is that, so that's over a 25-year period of time. Hopefully we'll still be here in 25 years. But it really is infill, and it's really kind of it's the maximum development you could possibly have. The other thing is that they may well be wrong, the demographers at MTC and ABAG, they may well, because what they're predicting is that the state of California has a population of the neighborhood of about, I don't know, 35 million, and I wonder if I'm photogenic, but we have 32 million or 34 million in the state of California, and they're saying we're going to have 50 million. And so they say that what they really want is to provide, well, obviously they want to have housing in areas where it's closer to transportation. Well, that really isn't true on the coast side. So that's the exemption, or the problem that we have is that we really are not close to transportation hubs. But we do have a rural corridor, and there is no other way of moving here, at least for now, except on Highway 1. And perhaps in the future, we would be able to get additional transportation resources, and so I certainly would look for that as well. So that was my reasoning for supporting the thinking that I think, not because they want to develop anything, but I just think that the kinds of changes that need to be made for safe crossings, I've heard that loud and clear, that we need to get the funding. Now, we'll apply for Measure A. By the way, one of the things that, one reason that we haven't applied for Measure A in the past is that, I can't speak for what my predecessor did, but I understand that there's never any consensus on I guess it's not the right of way, but on the plan. And I think that this latest Highway 1 mobility study, actually, if we get consensus, that actually becomes the planning document for things like the parallel trail, and for, I think, some pretty nice additions to like mediums in the roadway, so that it is safer. It's easier to, it's hard, we're not gonna put a bunch of stop signs here, we're not gonna put a bunch of controlled intersections, but if you had kind of islands that makes it safer for someone to cross one lane at a time, that's a significant improvement. So that is essentially my rationale. Now, Steve is actually much more, well, he's my expert, and I just want to reiterate, I knew nothing about that destruction derby. So David actually told me, I was afraid, I said, was that true? And I said, I guess we're looking to trying to find out. Okay. I don't know if I was out of order there, but.
No, either one you could present it. I thought you would speak first, and now Steve is going to give us the details.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity to come tonight. I've got to commend the council for the webpage you put together on this. It's clear that you've done a lot of research and perhaps know as much, if not more than me, on all the details of the program. And my hope is tonight that I can share the department's perspective on the overall program and our objectives, why we think it's worthwhile to apply and participate in this process. And to do that, I think it's important that we go back to 2006, I think it was, when SB 375 was passed by the state legislature, new legislation by Steinberg, which called for the integration of transportation and housing programs. It called for the development of sustainable community strategies for different regions, and the link between transportation and housing was kind of the fundamental core of it, in that in order to be sustainable, we needed to do a better job of balancing our jobs and housing and providing public transit so everybody's not commuting long distance in single occupancy vehicles. And it was really hailed as very progressive thinking and so cutting edge. And so after that legislation was passed, and by the way, it was tied into also another piece of legislation, AB 32, about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And the sustainable community strategy required by SB 375 was one of the ways in which we were going to achieve the reduction in greenhouse gases. So these grand ideas were laid out, and then the process of figuring out, well, how are we going to develop a sustainable community strategy started being discussed. The legislation assigns the primary responsibility to regional agencies in charge of transportation, planning, and housing. For San Mateo County, that's the Metropolitan Transportation Commission on the transportation side, and ABAG on the housing side. And so these regional agencies started formulating a process for carrying out the sustainable community strategy requirement. I've got to say that it's been somewhat difficult to stay on top of what they're all doing. You know, as you know, the Planning and Building Department, we've got limited resources, and it's a challenge for us to keep up with the day-to-day activities of what's going on in the unincorporated areas. And so, you know, keeping really on top of these regional agencies, it's been a strain on our department, but we've done our best. And in their efforts to develop a process for creating a sustainable community strategy, ABAG and MTC decided to build upon ABAG's focus program. The focus program being a program in which ABAG has identified these priority development areas, particularly on the Bayside, near transit stations, BART stations, Caltrain stations. In fact, the county got a grant through this program to work on North Fair Oaks, and we created a community plan for North Fair Oaks. So when ABAG and MTC decided to build on this focus program as a means to develop the sustainable community strategy, the county and other jurisdictions were put in the position of, well, we either participate and try and get a priority development area designation, or we miss the boat, and we're not part of this sustainable community strategy. And I shared many of the concerns, and I still share many of the concerns that have been expressed by the community about this label, priority development area, because I understand the rural nature of the area and the values that are important to the community here in terms of open space and rural character, and there's nothing in the Planning and Building Department's efforts that seeks to run contrary to those values. So, in order to preserve the county's eligibility to obtain the funds that were being channeled through the Sustainable Community Strategy and the PDA process, I felt that it was in, and others in the department agreed, that it was in the best interest of the county to deliver a message to ABAG and MTC that sustainable community strategy for the county and for the region cannot ignore our rural communities. I don't believe we can do an effective job of addressing issues related to climate change and sustainability by only looking at the Bayside and only looking at the Caltrain BART corridor. And so I have, from the beginning of the process, urged ABAG and MTC to not leave the rural areas out, because I believe we need investment in transit, in our roadways, and in our infrastructure. And so, despite my concerns and objections to this PDA label, it was the only way in which we could preserve our eligibility. And ABAG kind of came up with a last-minute decision, I believe, in response to the types of comments that I'm talking about, and kind of similar comments from other counties, that we can't leave out the rural areas. So we're going to come up with this rural corridor designation. And so we scrambled in the Planning and Building Department to put together an application to get this rural corridor designation. And the board supported us on that. And it's our understanding with this application and with all the materials that have come to, from ABAG, is that there are some very key assurances regarding maintaining local government's authority over planning and land use decisions. Okay, I was doing some research today on ABAG website to see what new information's come out, and they just released a question and answers document that I think is very helpful. I printed it out, put it in the office, but you guys might be interested in looking at it. And that's one of the key things that they highlight. Local control regarding land use designations, Planning policies, zoning regulations remains with the local government, and there is nothing in this designation or in the sustainable community strategy that will change that. The other thing that we've made clear in our application is that we acknowledge and respect the provisions of our local postal program. Okay? The local regulations for development on the coast are ruled by the local postal program. It's overseen by the California Coastal Commission. We have no intention of revising those provisions as detailed in our LCP update. And there's nothing in this regional planning effort that would in any way diminish or supersede the Coastal Commission's authority regarding our development standards. So the bottom line is that the county has pursued this designation in the interest of being eligible to tap into federal and state transportation dollars and planning dollars that will help us address safety and mobility through the Midcoast, that will help us address infrastructure issues. Now, of course, the county is, in many instances, not the ones responsible for water and sewer. And I have contacted the service districts to let them know that this designation may provide them with opportunities to obtain funding to address some of the infrastructure needs, be it wet weather overflows in our sewer system, water supply distribution lines that may enhance our ability to better manage our groundwater basins. And then back to transportation, as you know, traffic on the coast during the commute hours and weekends and major recreational events is a big concern. And one of the commitments that the county made to the Coastal Commission regarding those issues is to take a comprehensive look at transportation management on the coast. How can we better address circulation needs through public transit, better trails and sidewalks and alternatives to single occupancy vehicles? And we want to do that, but we need to find funding and the resources to make it happen. And I believe that this designation will enhance our ability to tap into the funding needed to make that happen. Now, I noticed on your website and in the agenda, it seems that one of the interests of the council is improving the process. And I know that there was a certain element of surprise with our when we approached the Board of Supervisors for their support for the application. And I do apologize for that, and I'm sincere when I tell you it's been difficult for us to keep on top of what's going on and all the deadlines. And had I had more time to come here before we had to get this application to ABAG, I would have done that. But that's in the past. From here on out, I'm very glad to see the council take a keen interest in this issue and to do the type of research that you're doing, because my hope is that we can partner. It's very difficult for myself and my staff to keep on top of all this, and if we can work as a team to figure out how we can best utilize this opportunity in a way that will be beneficial to the coast and with hopefully a shared vision that we have for protecting the coast and meeting our residents' needs, that we can turn this into a good thing and that we can stay coordinated on this. So that's my desire, and I'm happy to answer questions or talk through any ideas that the rest of the council
And
has.
just reiterate that, Bill, you sent me and asked me to delay. I did call planning to see if we could delay it because you asked for a public process. And the problem was that they had found out that they had this really quick deadline, so that's why we did not delay it, because we would have delayed it for a public process. And I did, and at the time I said, how can I, and we'll talk about it. It's still going before ABAG and FTC, so it's not a done deal yet.
And just a quick point of clarification, It wasn't me personally, it was the entire council. said
No, I know,
that.
I also.
And I don't wanna take
But
credit
no,
because
no,
some
no,
other
no,
people
no,
actually did the work.
I think the whole council knows that. What we did, and you remember when we
Yeah.
first did our first retreat, we said, I want everything to come from one, through the chair. And I recognize that anything that you said has really been vetted with the rest of the council.
I understood, but I just wanted to make sure that I give a
I
shout out
understand.
all around
Yeah.
camera to the rest of the council, because they did a lot of work on this. Anyway, that, if you're, so let me first, go through the council and see if there are any points of clarification on either Supervisor Horsley's or, Steve's presentation that you want clarified before we open it up to, public comment.
I want to thank you for your explanation. I think what everybody fears that there's so many areas that you have to get control of and communication with, that how anything gets done anytime is beyond me. But the fear is, you got ABAG 35 miles away, you got all these other committees involved in it, and staying on top of it is an extremely difficult situation. Thanks again, I appreciate it.
I thank you, Steve, for coming and giving the explanation. I do have one question, as regards to, rural corridor. I haven't heard anything specific, other than, possible helping fund for raised islands. And it sounds like maybe in the future, funding that could, provide for better public transportation or anything that would, reduce single occupancy vehicle traffic. So is this correct? All the money would be focused, if the county was to receive money, it would be focused on just that? Is this what the whole rural corridor concept is just improving the traffic flow?
It's not limited to that. There are a wide variety of sources of federal and state transportation and planning dollars that are tied in to this PDA designation and SCS. So for example, in some of the technical committees that I participate on, I've heard from many public works directors about their concern that 70% of funds designated for roadway maintenance will be directed to the priority development areas. And their concern is, well, if we don't have any priority development areas, or they're so small, how are we going to address the greater needs of the unincorporated area? So there's that sort of concern. It's got impacts on roadway maintenance dollars. From a planning and building perspective, I wouldn't attempt to identify all of the possible projects that we might seek to obtain funding for through this, because things might evolve. This council might come up with some ideas, other ideas might generate over time, but I can tell you some of our preliminary ideas. Mind you, these all have to be related to the broader concept of sustainable community, sustainable development. So some of the things that I've already mentioned are commitment to complete a comprehensive transportation management plan. So that would be a thorough study of regional circulation issues and how we can address that both by controlling ultimate build-out of the coast, by providing enhanced public transit, by providing better alternatives to vehicle use. So, that's an example of one project. Another potential project is a specific plan for Princeton. Now, we have been directed by the board to pursue such a plan, and we intend to do so, but funding through the sustainable community strategy would enhance our ability to complete that plan. Let's see, there was, I mentioned some of the ideas in terms of infrastructure enhancements that would require the participation of the service districts. I think there was one other, maybe it'll come back to me. But those are some examples of the sorts of projects we might seek funding for. Oh, it's the other one is the implementation of the Midcoast mobility studies. Supervisor has noted that, and that we do intend to go for Measure A funds. The Measure A funds are specific to the parallel trail. There are a lot of other concepts and ideas that are contained in the studies that we think could be beneficial to pursue, and we think that these sources of funds would enhance our ability to do so.
Two questions. First, in the answer you just gave, it appears to me that, looking at our agenda, that we now really have the discussion of the PDA and then what was referred to as item B, the mobility study next steps. The question I had is partly process, to ask if you had any more you were going to say under item B, or if what you just covered, which was somewhat comprehensive, if brief, addresses that, in which case we could have questions dealing with both A and B, because he's basically brought forward comments that go beyond just the PDA.
I do have a little bit more to say about the Highway 1 Safety and Mobility Study. It's fairly brief comments, if you'd like. I can
And my
cover
point
that.
to the council is either we could expand it that way, which we've partly done, or try to contain the